Did Elvis Presley actually die on August 16, 1977? We may now be closer to the truth than ever before.
The Elvis Conspiracy, hosted by Bill Bixby, Wednesday night at 7 on Channel 9. This is Chicago's Midday News.
Good afternoon, I'm Steve Sanders. That Japanese official who described American workers as lazy and illiterate, well, the Japanese government says that's only one man's opinion as it works to smooth out ruffled American feathers. Noisy protests are underway in the nation's capital as the Supreme Court sets the stage for a controversial abortion decision. And federal investigators are looking into the possibility human error may have caused Friday's fatal natural gas fires. Those stories just ahead right now. Tom Skilling, as we're in the midst of a delightful warm-up.
That's right. Steve, we're back in the El Nino pattern for the time being. We have milder temperatures, a frosty night on the way tonight, but then a weather system that we're watching very closely. It'll start as rain later tomorrow, but may change to snow. It may be a system to monitor, and we will be doing that on our weather show coming up. But here's Steve now with the news.
Thank you, Tom. Japanese leaders are trying to soothe U.S. anger over a Japanese official's remarks about the American workforce. Japan's foreign minister today chastised the Speaker of Japan's House of Representatives for calling American workers lazy and illiterate. He says that's not the general thinking among Japanese people. And the government spokesman says Japan is firmly determined to live up to trade concessions agreed to recently. Todd Benjamin has more.
President Bush called his trip to Tokyo a success, but success can be fleeting. Just over a week later, Prime Minister Kiichi Miyazawa said no promises were made to buy $19 billion of U.S. auto parts by fiscal 1994. Miyazawa said that was merely a target. The auto companies, who the Japanese government was jawboning, say promises were never made.
If you look at the press statements that are out from all of the Japanese companies, they clearly say targets.
An official Japanese document on the auto issue refers to targets. Even a U.S. document refers to it as a goal. But among some in the U.S., it may have been interpreted as a promise. It wouldn't be the first time the U.S. and Japan have had different ideas on what an agreement may mean.
The Japanese side, very often, their view is that they have their own interpretation of the agreement, and they will implement it in the way they interpret it. And it's really up to the United States to make sure that it's implemented in the way the U.S. interprets it.
Meanwhile, Japan's Speaker of the House is denying he called the United States Japan's subcontractor, and denied the trade imbalances because of a partially illiterate U.S. workforce. His denial coming after those reported remarks caused an uproar stateside.
A lot of Japanese politicians and businessmen are not aware of what the impact of what they're saying here about foreign countries are, and they're not very internationalized.
Despite the denials, the damage has already been done. The reported remarks about the quality of the U.S. workforce and the possibility that Japan may not buy as many auto parts as some first believed is already fanning the fires of protectionism now spreading through Congress. Todd Benjamin, CNN, Tokyo.
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court today agreed to hear a case that will determine whether to uphold Pennsylvania's strict abortion law. The decision comes on the eve of the 19th anniversary of the High Court's decision that legalized abortion. And anti-abortion activists are already staging protests. Skip Loescher has more on the case and its implications.
This is the case, the chance that abortion rights activists have been waiting for. A chance to put the issue of legalized abortion before the Supreme Court in an election year. But the High Court may not choose to rule on the overall issue. Pro-choice activists are hoping the Supreme Court will rule on whether women still have a fundamental right to abortion.
If the Supreme Court upholds the Pennsylvania law, it is overturning Roe v. Wade, because what it's saying is that abortion is no longer a fundamental right.
But the High Court could also simply strike down as too restrictive provisions in the Pennsylvania law requiring a 24-hour waiting period before a woman could get an abortion, requiring that a woman be informed about alternatives to abortion, and requiring that minors receive parental consent before getting an abortion.
Those are reasonable provisions in the statute that the public supports, that the pro-abortionists do not, and would like to see the public opposed by a reframing of the issue on their part.
The battle over abortion may get hotter. Anti-abortion advocates did their best to disrupt operations at some of the more than 24 abortion clinics in the Washington, D.C. area today. Pro-choice demonstrators tried to keep them from blocking entrances to the clinics, and police made some arrests. Major demonstrations are planned for tomorrow, the 19th anniversary of the Supreme Court ruling which legalized abortion. If the High Court chooses to overturn its Roe versus Wade decision, it could have a major effect on political campaigns. And some analysts say President Bush could be hurt.
If that happened, I think there would be an explosive reaction among pro-choice voters, which includes a lot of Republicans, Republican women, well-educated voters. Abortion is the issue that can tear the Republican coalition apart.
The Supreme Court will hear this case in April and is likely to hand down its ruling by July. In Washington, I'm Skip Loescher, WGN Midday News.
The National Transportation Safety Board reports it's investigating the possibility that human error caused last Friday's gas explosions on Chicago's near West Side. Meanwhile, all 3 victims of the blast at Alan Bass's Racine Avenue photography studio have now been identified. In addition to Bass, the explosion killed 31-year-old Victoria Opeka of North Lincoln Avenue. Miss Opeka was doing makeup on Bass's young client, 19-year-old Steve Honig of Glencoe, an aspiring actor and graduate of New Trier High School, where he excelled in drama. The well-known personal injury attorney, Philip Corboy, is representing the Honig family in a suit against People's Gas. Additional lawsuits are expected. The explosions caused several injuries and many lost their homes. At a community meeting last night, survivors and neighbors came together to determine their immediate future. Jim Ramsey was there and filed this report.
More than 200 people came here to St. John's Cantius Church to get some answers. Although most of these residents made their way through the crisis of Friday without either loss of property or injury, they have other worries. Organizers of this meeting hope to give them help.
We felt the need to get together and see who needs help and how we can help them and what we can do with regard to dealing with the gas company, dealing with people who need housing, and showing our concern for those who died and are homeless as a result.
For the past few days, gas trucks have been a common sight around here as crews check for problems and continue to make repairs. This has unnerved some people who wonder even now about the safety of their gas appliances.
Couldn't really sleep last night because we heard the People's Gas truck out all night and just never really knew if it was safe to stay there.
Safety was all but assumed the day before the explosions. One person even recalled smelling gas in his home last Thursday. Such recollections have also been heard by People's Gas.
We had smelled gas the day before in the apartment. As a matter of fact, my roommate was the one who got up, and it was at 3 o'clock in the morning when he smelled the whole apartment filled with gas, and he raised up the windows and the doors and everything.
We had heard those rumors as well, or heard those comments. I won't call them a rumor. We are checking our records now. Typically, when we get a call on a leak, we're there within 30 minutes. That's about our average leak response time. To date, we started looking yesterday. We have not found any indications of any calls from any. I think there was a particular address involved where that allegation was made. And so far, from records immediately available, we have not found anything. We're continuing to look.
Jim Ramsey, WGN News.
3 Skokie men are the first to be charged with looting in the aftermath of Friday's explosion and fires. They're accused of trying to steal 1,000 feet of copper wire from a near Northwest Side company damaged in Friday's gas explosion. 2 Chicago police officers were on special looting patrol this morning when they reportedly saw the men loading the wire into a car. One officer says the wire was so heavy it broke a spring in the car. The men accused are 27-year-old Christopher Doring, 28-year-old Lewis Simon, and his 30-year-old brother Peter, all of Skokie. The Illinois General Assembly is scheduled to vote on a compromise state budget today, but this budget could compromise education and welfare, the 2 sectors targeted for the biggest cuts. Governor Edgar and leaders of both parties reportedly agreed on the plan Thursday. The plan calls for $280 million in spending cuts for fiscal 92 and $70 million in transfers from special purpose funds. Under the new proposal, education will lose $34 million. Edgar's first proposal took $36 million away from schools, and the proposed budget will axe $60 million from public aid. Renewed concern over the health hazard radar guns may pose to police officers who use them. The Palos Hills Police Department is the first in the state to take precautions. The South Suburban law enforcers have relocated the radar gun from inside the patrol car to the vehicle's roof. It was WGN News that first alerted the public to nationwide concerns these devices may cause cancer. We did so in an investigative piece last year called Speed Trap or Death Trap. Subsequently, lawsuits were filed by police officers in Florida, California, and Wisconsin, claiming microwave emissions from the antennas may cause cancer. In addition, a police department in Florida has also remounted the guns on patrol car roofs. Palos Hills Police Chief Sam Nelson says none of the big health organizations such as the AMA or the American Cancer Society could tell him whether the devices pose a risk, but he would rather be safe than sorry. Meanwhile, a major radar gun supplier has long denied that they are a health hazard. When the Midday News continues, Cuba makes good on a death sentence for one of 3 commandos, and questions about why a French jet crashed on what looked like a routine approach.
Through care, you can turn cries for help into the laughter of hope. Care.
Your Better Buick dealers have 2 words for the makers of overpriced look-alike imports. Get real. Why pay premium for a Me Too car from over there? The stunning new 1992 Buick Skylark offers the biggest engine in its class, standard anti-lock brakes, plus many luxury features not even found on most imports. And it's all wrapped in bold new styling that sets Skylark apart from the crowd. For real quality and value, plus big introductory savings, see your Better Buick dealer today.
Fact, on December 21st, Fretter's prices were lower than Highland on item after item. Proof? Fretter's everyday price on this GE washer was $22 less than Highland. Fretter's price on a GE refrigerator was $42 less. An RCA TV, $52 less than Highland. A Whirlpool refrigerator was $102 less. And a Packard Bell computer was $247 less. Conclusion? If you want Fretter prices, you've got to go to Fretter.
If you've been injured on the job, in a car, or on a motorcycle, it can be a painful experience. Don't make the mistake so many others have. Don't go it alone. Don't leave yourself unprotected. Learn your legal rights. At Balkan and Doran, we've stood for excellence in personal injury law for over 20 years. And the right legal advice would mean the difference of thousands, even millions of dollars.
Call Balkan and Doran at 1-800-INJURED now.
Meet Cinnamon Quaker Oat Squares. Cinnamon taste that gives flakes the shakes.
Meet my little brother, Cinnamon Quaker Oat Squares. He's just like me.
But I've got the delicious taste of cinnamon. You mean your toasted whole grain oats plus cinnamon, sprinkled with brown sugar plus cinnamon. And you stay crunchy in milk. Don't forget the cinnamon. 2 kinds of Quaker Oat Squares. That's too many.
Cinnamon Quaker Oat Squares. You'll love them.
From Square One.
Investigators recovered both black box recorders today from a French jetliner that crashed in eastern France. Officials fear 87 people were killed when the plane went down in snow and fog. 9 were rescued. Investigators say the jetliner was following normal procedure during its landing approach, but say it was flying at a lower altitude than normal. Peter Humey has more.
For the handful of survivors, it was a harrowing ordeal. After crawling dazed and shocked from the wreckage, some of them badly injured, there was to be a 4-hour wait before rescuers arrived on the scene on a remote and heavily wooded mountainside about 30 miles southeast of Strasbourg. Snow, fog and freezing conditions delayed the rescue parties and added to the survivors' hardships. Those who lived spoke of 10 to 15 seconds of sheer terror as the plane, preparing to land, skimmed through treetops before hitting the ground and exploding.
There was a shock and then several shocks, like an accident. Then we were thrown in all different directions. We panicked a little because we didn't know what had happened. Then we realized we had crashed somewhere.
Most of the survivors, including a 9-year-old boy and a 13-month-old baby girl, were seated towards the rear of the plane. The most severely injured were first cared for by other survivors. One spoke of putting the injured close to burning wreckage in an effort to keep them warm in the freezing conditions. More than 1,000 medics, police and army personnel were deployed in the search, which was launched soon after the plane on an internal flight from Lyon disappeared off the radar screens. The Airbus 320 is one of the most modern planes now flying. Only in service since 1988, its onboard computer systems are uniquely capable of operating all of the plane's controls. In theory, it flies itself. However, its reliability has been in question. A spectacular crash almost at its debut during an air show in France 3.5 years ago, and a crash of an Indian Airlines Airbus in 1990, between them claimed nearly 100 lives. Both those incidents were put down to pilot error. A full-scale inquiry has been launched into Monday night's disaster, and French Prime Minister Edith Cresson is cutting short a visit to Italy to visit survivors in Strasbourg. Peter Humey, CNN, Paris.
In just 3 weeks' time, Cuba has tried, convicted, and reportedly executed a Miami resident it claims was a terrorist. The official Cuban news agency says Eduardo Diaz Betancourt was killed by firing squad yesterday. The report triggered outrage by Cuban exiles in Miami. John Didakis reports.
In Miami's Little Havana, where hatred of Fidel Castro is deep, people gathered last night to vent their grief and anger.
This boy, that the only thing that he did was to try to defend the freedom of Cuba.
He's referring to this man, 38-year-old Eduardo Diaz Betancourt. Diaz Betancourt and 2 other men were captured 3 weeks ago, allegedly trying to smuggle weapons and explosives into Cuba. The Cuban government says the 3 confessed that they were planning to bomb stores, movie theaters, and other civilian targets in an attempt to spread panic in an already economically depressed Cuba. Despite worldwide pleas for clemency, Diaz Betancourt was executed by firing squad yesterday. His 2 accomplices also received the death penalty, but their sentences were commuted to 30 years in prison. The Cuban military says the 3 men were members of Alpha 66, an anti-Castro group that practices mock invasions of Cuba in the Florida Everglades. Cuba accuses the United States of ignoring the military training, a charge the U.S. denies. The collapse of the Soviet Union has dealt an economic body blow to Fidel Castro's revolutionary dictatorship. Castro has been forced to implement widespread rationing of food and energy. In the past year, more than 2,000 people have escaped from the foundering nation. One of them was a man who chose to return just months later, Eduardo Diaz Betancourt. John Didakis, CNN reporting.
Turning to a somewhat less serious crime, if you have 10 or more unpaid Chicago parking tickets, it's time to pay up. The state has a list of more than 5,400 ticket scofflaws who have piled up nearly $5 million in fines and will now start suspending driver's licenses.
That they have received over 40 notices if they've had 10 tickets, so it's not going to be a surprise, I wouldn't guess, to anybody if we go out and suspend their license if they've made no attempt to contact us, whether they in fact belong on the list or not.
Chicago was supposed to implement this program last year, but there were some errors found on an earlier list of parking ticket scofflaws. Ryan says this list, though, is an accurate one. Well, the Secretary of State says he may have to lay off at least 300 of his employees if he honors nearly $3 million in pay raises promised to union employees. Because of the state budget cuts, Ryan says his office cannot afford to grant the pay hikes, which were supposed to go into effect last July for about 2,600 workers. As many as 350 employees may lose their jobs if an arbitrator orders the state to grant the pay hikes. A decision is expected by Monday. Police are searching for more witnesses in the Northwest Side murder of an unidentified man. The victim, described as a black male, 16 to 20 years old. His body discovered here in an alley behind a Kimball Avenue home at about 11 o'clock last night. Officials say the dead man had been shot in the back of the head and in the right shoulder. Police recovered several pieces of gold jewelry from the body, but say they did not find a wallet or any identification. Fire officials today say a single fire in a South Side home ignited 3 other blazes overnight. The first fire began here at 7633 South Eggleston about 1 o'clock in the morning. Now that fire spread, touching off blazes at houses on either side. The blaze at 7631 South Eggleston touched off yet another at the 7629 address. The home where the fire originated was gutted. The 3 other homes were only moderately damaged. Fire officials say no one was injured in the fires. New figures released by Commonwealth Edison show the utility company taking a big loss in the last quarter of 1991. And ComEd says it lost money because its proposed rate hikes were rejected by the courts. ComEd is reporting a $429 million loss for the third quarter of 1991. That breaks down to $2.11 lost for every share of ComEd stock. The 1991 year figures show ComEd with profits of almost $95 million, a 26% decrease from 1990. Tom Skilling joining us now. Pretty nice day out there.
It sure is, especially after that Arctic siege we went through over the weekend and last week, Steve. And it should be pretty nice the rest of the afternoon.
Good to hear that.
And a hunk of tomorrow. But after that, we do have a system on the way. A frosty night tonight as well. That system on the way may turn rather wintry before it's all over. Later tomorrow night, we'll tell you more about that when we come back in a moment.
I won $5,000.
Now you can win $5,000 playing Spell It, the new telephone spelling bee.
Call this number on a touch-tone phone. Listen and spell 21 words correctly in 2 minutes or less, and you win $200 instantly.
It's easy and fun to play. Spell the word cash.
C-A-S-H.
That's right.
I won $200.
Grand prize $5,000. Call 1-900-SPELL-IT. $1.99 per minute, average call 5 minutes.